When I'm not thinking about conspiracy theories, I'm thinking about stupid movies. I'm not talking about The Room or whatever. Those kind of so bad they're good movies are fun and fascinating in their own way, but they're far from my favorite. There's another kind of movie that I can talk about for hours. Disaster pieces. A disaster piece is a generally mediocre studio film, generically shot, generically acted. Overall, it's fine, but there's some incredibly bizarre elements that make the movie fascinating. Something that comes to mind are the recent Venom movies. They are generic superhero movies that feel ripped out of the 2000s, but the queer subtext, the surprising humor, and Tom Hardy's wacky performance make them much more memorable than they would have otherwise been.
I am out of the Eddie closet!
They've developed a cult following because of this. It is these kind of movies that invoke endless discussion in me. They ruminate in my brain, and I can't stop thinking about them. Not necessarily because I appreciate the craft, time, and the effort the filmmakers put into them, but because I just keep wondering why certain decisions were made. Certain creative choices that I find remarkable, because they come out of an otherwise unremarkable system. A system that sees these films as products rather than works of art. This brings us to Saw 6.
He wanted us to learn.
And did you?
Look at me. Look at my goddamn arm! What the fuck am I supposed to learn from this, huh? Look at my arm! What? What am I supposed to learn from this?
My co-writer Peter and I constantly annoy our friends with our endless discussion. As with my Port Arthur series, I'm making this so I never have to think about it ever again. What I want to do is take a deep dive into why this movie is the way that it is. Ask what makes it tick, why it gets so many things wrong, and still, how it manages, in spite of everything, to be just remarkably enjoyable. So get your creepy puppets, put on your pig mask, and strap in as we talk your limbs off about Saw 6. Look, we're only going to give you a brief history of the Saw franchise. In watching a video on such a niche topic, we assume that the audience knows who James Wan and Leigh Whannell are. And we also assume that they know about the development of the Saw IP. So, we're only going to recap the points relevant to our arguments. I feel like that I often come across a little bit long-winded. Oh no! So, we're only going to focus on the good stuff here. If you want to be fully informed on the Saw franchise up until this point, I recommend the recap by Your Movie Sucks. I'll link it in the description. Let's get into it. The first problem that we have to contend with is that Saw was never meant to have any sequels. The Saw franchise began because two Aussie blokes, James Wan and Leigh Whannell, wanted to make a movie together, and they came up with the idea that would eventually become Saw.
We wanted to make a film, but we quickly realised that in Australia, it's a very small film industry. It's very hard to get films made, and mostly films are funded by the government to this day.
After failing to get their project funded in Australia, they flew to Hollywood, complete with a short film as part of their pitch. This was a proof of concept, if you will.
And that's when we made the short. The short is really just one scene from the movie. It's like a demo reel.
And use that short film to showcase myself as a filmmaker and to showcase Leigh as an actor.
And we did that so that when we came here to LA, we could say, hey, here's the script and here's one scene from the movie. This is what it would look like.
You know, it's impressive, but unremarkable. We can completely disregard this. The film was quickly picked up by the producers, Mark Berg, Aaron Kullers, and Greg Hoffman.
And, an agent said, you know, you got to see something. There's something that's really cool, and they actually have a script. And they showed Greg the 7-minute tape, and he's like, whoa. So he thought it was pretty cool. He came back to Evolution, and he grabbed Mark and I and went to my office. We said, okay, we made 3 copies of the script, and went home and read it, and came back next day and thought, this is something really cool. There's something to it.
And they go, we want to make this movie. We don't have a lot of money to make it, but you guys can come and play with us on it. You can direct it, James, and Leigh, you can act in it. Let's go and make this film.
And after the massive success of Saw in 2004, a new sequel came out every year until 2010. And because they had a pretty fast turnaround, there wasn't exactly a lot of time to work on the plot, One of the staples of the Saw franchise, apart from the traps and Tobin Bell, was the twist ending. After The Sixth Sense came out, studios wanted movies with plot twist endings because it would prompt audiences to see the movies more than once. Saw 1 had this amazing twist ending that got people talking, and it just became part of Saw's brand. You're not just watching this to see someone lose an arm, you're watching it to figure out the twist. While this makes the Saw franchise quite fun and unpredictable, the compounding problems of a short development time and the need to one-up the previous twist quickly made the Saw movies spiral into absurdity. So, I view the Saw franchise as going through 4 distinct phases. Phase 1 makes up the first 3 movies, or as I like to call it, the Jigsaw trilogy. These movies are self-serious and they aspire to be gritty, grimy thrillers. They're all contained and they primarily focus on John Kramer. The problem is, at the end of Saw 3, he dies, along with pretty much everyone else who's part of Team Jigsaw. This was supposed to be the grand operatic ending of Saw. Unfortunately, producer Greg Hoffman passed away shortly after the release of Saw 2.
It's hard to talk about the Saw films and the Saw world without Greg's name coming up, because he was so instrumental to the success of the Saw films, and and we all just love him as a human being.
So Juan, Winnell, and the rest of the producers got together and they decided to end the franchise with a neat viscera-covered bow, as a tribute to Hoffman. This would be the last time that Juan and Winnell were close to the franchise, as they went on to pursue other projects. Oh my goodness, what a fun, tight, contained trilogy. Lovely, no more. But Saw 3 made a bunch of money, and since capitalism is a thing, they decided just to make another one. The second problem rears its ugly head in Phase 2, which I like to call treading water. Where the hell do you go when all of the main characters of your franchise are dead? You could bring back Dr. Gordon maybe, he's famous from the first one, but he was kind of in the middle of suing the hell out of them, so that's not really an option. There were no characters left that people actually cared about, so let's just focus on some random cop who was a bit character in the previous film. The Saw movies were never really concise, but 4 and 5 are incredibly disjointed, and they're often aimless and boring. They're trying to figure out the new identity of the franchise on the fly, but because Tobin Bell is the best thing about the initial trilogy,
I was like 3 guys locked in a bathroom? Well, that's so, it's Waiting for Godot. I mean, who makes a movie about 3 guys locked in a bathroom? You can accomplish as much in the horror genre with good writing as you can in any other genre.
they keep just forcing him in with a whole bunch of flashbacks. The excuse for this is that they need to fill out his backstory, but it seems like in reality they didn't really know what to do. They're treading water because the movies can't make up their minds about what they want to be. Are they still psychological thrillers, or are they gory burlesque shows? It's just difficult for the series to decide. We see this in the ending of Saw 3, the supposed end to the original and intended series. That ending was so definitive that the only thing Saw 4 could do was take place on the same day as 3, and 5 starts where 3 ends. And they reused the twist of a secret henchman actually being helping all of the time as an excuse for another Jigsaw to run the show now. Phase 3 consists of films 6 and 7, and it's what I like to call self-awareness. As with most long-running horror franchises, there comes a point where they run out of steam. Inevitably, they begin to comment on themselves. This can sometimes be the most fun part of the franchise. Think of Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. Jason Goes to Hell. That's a really bad movie. Why did you put that in the script? It's a bad movie. It's not. And Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. These movies dive completely into silly, self-aware camp. The later entries no longer resemble the serious horror movies they started as. And Saw 6 finds this interesting balance between silly self-awareness and being an actual satisfying sequel. To cover all bases, the last and final phase is the shiny reboot, where they discard the grimy aesthetic of the previous installments, and they begin making straightforward Saw movies that lack the charm of the early ones. The neat thing about the Saw movies is that each of them have their own moral through line. A lesson that Jigsaw wants to teach. Saw 2, when you think about it, is kind of about patience. Donnie Wahlberg over here has to be patient to get his son back. The third one is about forgiveness. This guy has to forgive some people who were involved in his son's death. The fifth one is about teamwork. The characters have to survive the trap rooms by working together. And the fourth one is about not going through doors too quickly.
Carrie! Ring! Don't do it! Rick, I said no! Carrie! Stop it! Do not go through that door!
So of course Saw 6 had to have this simple theme that the American healthcare system is systemically broken and is implicitly predatory towards the lower classes in society. They should have called it Sickle instead of Saw. Yeah! These movies have been pretty mindless up until this point, and this is very jarring. To see a Saw movie that's about something. Like, okay, America, 2008. In the wake of the worst financial crash of the last century, we have the rise of the Occupy Wall Street movement. We also have the opioid crisis, with an intense distrust of Big Pharma. People are dying and the future is only growing darker. There's a lot of energy in the air, with no appropriate outlet. Neoliberalism is never going to stop. So the only thing you can do with all of this angst is profit off of it.
I've been with this insurance company for over 10 years.
Now, it's important to recognize that this was not like a cynical decision. The producers did not just notice a social issue and decide to ride the populist wave all the way to the box office. It came from the writers, Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan, who wanted to give the movie a genuine political message.
It was time to put John Kramer back in the driver's seat with this entry, and we were very, very fortunate to rope in the idea of his anger at the health system that also let him down and discarded his life as just another number, as a loss.
And it is that earnest quality is what makes the movie so bizarre. This is a Saw movie. The franchise famous for the Princess Bride cutting off his foot has to make political commentary about Bush's America. And don't get me wrong, horror has always been a hotbed for social commentary. Halloween is about the paranoia of living in the suburbs. Candyman interrogates the relationship between urban myth and race. And the most famous horror movie of all time, The Exorcist, interrogates ideas of faith in an incredibly secular society. And you can read the Saw movies as being adjacent to the use of advanced interrogation techniques post 9/11. It is not bizarre that a horror movie is trying to be smart. Horror has always been smart. It is only bizarre that the franchise that punishes a cop for going through a door too quickly,
you know never to go through an unsecured door, ever,
has suddenly pivoted to healthcare.
I paid my monthly premium for 10 years without so much as a cold. And now that I'm actually sick, you're gonna deny my coverage? I have a family!
those are the rules.
And while we will argue that the opinions of the series are kind of bad, remarkably, it works as a theme. The retcon that John Kramer has beef with a healthcare company works really well. And we're not the only ones who think so. Critics, even though they didn't love the movie, did note the sudden shift as positive. Roger Moore, for the Seattle Times, wrote,
"You just don't expect that from a Saw movie, do you? But this script, by Marcus Dunstan and Patrick Melton, has a more lyrical bent and a more satirical bite than any of the other Saw sequels."
And Wesley Morris wrote for the Boston Globe,
"Who knew that the franchise's creators would eventually find a plot twist that made sense? Who knew they'd realize that Tobin Bell's righteous killer had current events value? Given our cable news climate, it's not beyond imagining that John Kramer could have had his own populist TV show, Jigsaw's Death Panel."
Now, these reviews are certainly written with their tongues firmly embedded within their cheeks, but it echoes a general sentiment that this was a surprise turn for the series. And I really think that this political angle gives the movie some energy. There is one small problem. This movie's not smart.
These politicians, they say the same thing over and over and over again. Healthcare decisions should be made by doctors and their patients, not by the government. Well, now I know they're not made by doctors and their patients or by the government. They're made by the fucking insurance companies. Piranha.
The main criticism, if I can call it that, is that William Easton's company, Umbrella, it's a very subtle reference. Umbrella is too analytical to be in the business of healthcare. Easton doesn't care about people. Wah! Easton is always rattling on about his company's formula.
Monthly payments multiplied by lifespan minus the probability of illness, and if the sum is positive, we consider coverage.
And the movie, unable to articulate that this is just a product of neoliberal capitalism, is just like,
isn't that immoral?
The criticism is of the immorality of the individual company, not the system it exists within. It's a very milquetoast libertarian take. And this is not to say that I don't agree with what the movie is saying, because yes, predatory companies are in fact bad, Piranha. But the critiques are no deeper than a kiddie pool. But darn tootin' if it isn't charming to see Tobin Bell just stomp about in a kiddie pool. By virtue of having a more complicated theme than the rest of the Saw franchise, I argue that this dumbs down the quote-unquote morality of these movies. Much like their color grade, these films are grimy and difficult to pass morally. There aren't exactly a lot of right answers to be found. Take this example from Saw 3. You have this guy who lost his son in a car accident or something. His part in the game is letting go of his own cynical self-destructive spiral. He has to grow as a character, and his decisions in the traps are kind of morally complex. Sure, saving this guy or that lady would be nice, but you understand that this character has mixed feelings about doing this. It creates emotional drama, tension beyond the gore. And then by Saw 6, it's all like, this guy smokes and he deserves to die!
Who the hell is that?
The morality here is binary, which means the decisions that the characters make now have lower stakes, and they are less intense. And that makes the movie more fun. This is one of the many fascinating paradoxes that makes this movie intoxicating to discuss. And the best part about this is that this was an entirely intentional decision made by first-time director Kevin Garnett. It's spelt weird. Hey Google, auto-translate.
Kevin Goiter?
Saying,
I think there is some bold visual design in this film that builds on what we've seen in the previous Saw movies. I know what I like from the past films, I know what I didn't like, and I tried to do more of what I liked. And that goes for characters, trying to find the salient points for these characters in the storyline and using that to tell a lot of story in a short amount of time. It can't be speed and chaos the whole time. I wanted the Saw films to feel not just like a ride, but it needs to be a roller coaster, and it needs to make you feel like it's broken down. It's slow and dark, and then something jumps out. The floor falls out from under you and you're back on the roller coaster.
Consider the opening scene. Two loan sharks wake up in a trap. Their game is simple. They have to pay penance with their flesh, and whoever gives more of their meat and weighs down the scale lives. The game is brutal and confronting, but it is wonderfully blunt with its message. I mean, this lady literally pays her forearm to live. There is a strange morality here. So the usual shtick of Saw is that they present us with a person who is flawed, whether they be a drug dealer, an abuser, or they go through doors too quickly.
Are you trying to get yourself killed?
They're generally not so bad that we want them to die. They're given just enough motive so that we feel some empathy for them, and this empathy creates tension. Since we identify with them just a little bit, we wonder to ourselves whether or not we would do what it takes to survive. This idea is on mute in Saw 6. We see their profession as bad, which it is, and because of that, we enjoy watching these loan sharks tear themselves apart for their bad actions. Much of my argument that Saw 6 is the best in the franchise comes from this shift, so let's examine it just a little bit closer. That big long German word does not have an English language equivalent, but it defines a state of mind that finds pleasure in other people's pain. You laugh at a mean character when they fall down the stairs. So by this point in the Saw franchise, the base audience isn't here to ponder over a tight thriller. They want to see some prick get his comeuppance. I want to take a quick moment to examine the kind of pleasure that we can take from viewing other people suffering. I have what I call the ouchie spectrum. At number 1, we have the Three Stooges. This is silly, cartoony, non-violent violence. The hits are jokes, and the punches are punchlines that are meant to make us laugh. We don't feel bad for anyone because the act of hitting is a kind of exclamation point. It is low stakes, and the pain is not disturbing because the point is to laugh at it. Then, as we get up to about 5 on the scale, we have Jackass. These silly men have consented to be pranked and terrorized by their other friends, and they try to one-up each other with their stunts. There is a jovial aura around the boys. It is good-natured, and the pain they go through is meant to be funny. Often shocking, always crass, but funny. Contrast this with the end of the scale, Guinea Pig, Devil's Experiment, which is this Japanese mock snuff film. A woman is cruelly tortured by sadists for their own gratification. It is not artsy, it is not funny, it is gross, it is yucky, and the primary audience is for perverts to jerk off to.
Also, there are adrenaline junkies who watch this kind of thing for fun.
Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
There is no fun to be had with Guinea Pig. It's just disturbing for the sake of it. Between Jackass and Guinea Pig, we have Saw. We are in that morally grey area, where being really into violent gore porn movies is a little bit weird but socially acceptable. Sometimes we forget now that the Saw franchise broke taboos for violence on screen. And even though our critique is from the lens of this movie feeling incredibly silly, the violence is still gnarly.
Saw is one of the few key films that has influenced an entire generation of filmmakers. When you make a movie now after Saw, especially within the genre, you are either imitating it, you're responding to it, you're reacting against it, you're trying to top it, or you're paying homage to it.
We were working at a time where, coming out of the 90s, where all movies were so, not bad, but not efficient anymore.
So Lionsgate comes in, and they saw Hostel, and they went, well, this is too violent. And I said, well, what about Saw? They're like, yeah, but I don't know, this is too much. And then Saw 2 is a big hit, and they said, okay, yeah, we'll release Hostel. So in a crazy way, Cabin Fever helped Saw, and then the Saw movies gave Lionsgate, you know, the courage to release Hostel.
They were just very soft and very, they were not visceral. They were not like getting you in your gut and making you feel that you were like going through hell when you were watching the movie.
Everybody had very personal movies. They're like, no one was adapting things, no one was remaking things. Everyone just had an idea for something that had to get out of them. And we all really supported each other.
We are in that grey area where we can indulge ourselves in the violence in a fun way, though. And in this movie, the closest character surrogate is Rodrick's character. What's his name? Brent. It's Brent. But I'm going to keep calling him Rodrick anyway. Him and his mum, Susan Heffley, are whisked away from their regular lives.
Sweet mama!
The good thing about this setup is that they aren't harmed, and they get to watch as the games play out. They are, in a word, absolved of murder, of guilt, of any negative emotions, because even if Easton does kind of learn his lesson throughout the game, he's still the bad guy. Now, the way the movie frames Easton is wonderfully condensed. Over the course of one scene, he tells his wife that he has to cancel their plans for her birthday dinner, and we also find out he's being sued by Rodrick's family for Frank Heffley's death immediately. Everything is set up that will eventually be paid off with his character. Something that's important to note is that Easton is not an unbearable character, which is good. A problem that I have with Saw 7 is how unlikable every character is. They want you to want these characters dead. However, not only does this take all the tension out of the situation, you are stuck with a bunch of unlikable pricks until they die. This isn't satisfying. In contrast, Easton is bad, but he isn't sex pest bad, which allows us to hold him at a distance and eventually warm up to him as the traps go along. Saw was the most popular horror franchise of the 2000s, and I'm not saying that through magical thinking, that Saw 6 made everything suddenly fun. All of these movies have been fun in their own way. I mean, Saw 2 just has a man pick up a lady and throw her into a pit of needles. But what I am arguing is that Saw 6 was the first one to really discard the supposed morality of these movies. Like, let's take for example, the first trap that Easton goes through. Easton wakes up with a machine strapped to his ribs, and there is a man across from him. Jigsaw explains that with every breath they take, he will be watching. I mean the machine will push further down on their ribs, and they will die if they breathe too much. The visual design of this trap is really neat. I love the black background. It looks like a void, and the only things that we can focus on are the characters.
For the breathing room, I wanted the light to drop off all around, so it's almost like you're in this kind of infinite, horrible, dark place.
Actually, I enjoyed that. I'm always getting walls. I'm getting walls and caves and hallways, and it was kind of nice to just have pure black fall off into the distance.
It stands by the classic Saw shtick of imagining yourself within a scenario. You might even hold your breath to see if you would make it. But the oft-mentioned thing here is that the man Easton is up against is a janitor who works for Umbrella Health. He is there because,
while only 52 years of age, this man has continued to smoke even though he has a history of high blood pressure and heart disease.
Which means, I guess he didn't appreciate his life enough? This goes against Jigsaw's rule that
killing is distasteful.
But what I'm most interested in is how this further reinforces the weird politics of the movie. This character is a janitor, a person with no power in the company, and Jigsaw went after him. That's bizarre, right? That he's punishing the ultra-wealthy and powerful man by killing a working class person. Hypothetically, why couldn't it be a co-owner of the company who also smokes? I mean, that would have made the scene more impactful, at least for me. It's the lack of forethought that goes into these traps that makes the supposed lessons this movie is trying to teach this character hilarious to me. The second trap is, in our opinion, the funniest one in the entire movie. For starters, Easton walks towards it. The signs say, "Take them." And he's just like,
fuck that.
I think this small moment actually endears us to him. He acts in such a way that most people would like to think they would act if they were in here. They'd be like, nope.
Yeah, no.
So the trap here is actually pretty simple. There are two people on a platform. An old lady with a family history of diabetes and a young man with no family.
According to your policy, your secretary is older and weaker, but you know the loss that she will be to her family. while young Alan will disappear without a blip on the world's radar.
Gilf is the best gender-neutral pronoun. What Jigsaw wants Easton to consider is the value of life as it relates to health, since the formula that Umbrella uses is generally utilitarian in nature. Utilitarianism is a political philosophy that proclaims the correct action in any situation is the one that produces the most amount of happiness for the most amount of people. Imagine, I'm amidst a group of friends. Pretty unrealistic, I know. But imagine, I have produced a baking tray full of cookies for these friends. Instead of eating them all in front of them with a gluttonous disposition, the utilitarian would say that the right action is to share the cookies equally amongst my friends because that would increase the most amount of happiness from the situation. That's how utilitarianism works. Unfortunately, we're not talking about cookies here, we're talking about healthcare. Saw tackles the problem of healthcare in late-stage capitalism by injecting a little bit of absurdity into it. Utilitarianism sounds nice within a vacuum, but when you combine it with capitalism, things get not good. What Jigsaw is doing here is saying that there's a certain amount of eugenics to the healthcare problem. Whose life do you save? The man who has no family but can go on to contribute to that economic system? Or do you save the old lady who increases the amount of happiness in the world due to her family's love for her? Which way, Western man? In the end, he chooses family, which is a reoccurring theme throughout the movie. Easton stops being a man so all-consumed by work that he won't see his wife on her birthday, to a man who saves people because they have a family. Like, it's not much of an arc by most standards, but for Saw, this is pretty good. This is about as good as it gets. The problem with this little philosophical conundrum is that both the people in the trap did nothing wrong. This is a really, really dumb trolley problem. Why the hell was this guy picked? Was he picked specifically because he has no friends or family? It comes complete with sad black and white photos of pigeons and such. Jigsaw had to have edited those photos black and white, right? Like, did he really have to increase the emotional affect on Easton? My man's just on his work break. Leave him alone. And of course...
Say the line, Bart!
How did she get down from there? Yeah! In terms of this movie, this is the weakest trap. But what I still find neat about it is that this is a character building moment for Easton. At the beginning of the movie, you start out frustrated with him, but we grow more sympathetic with him as he gets further along into the game. The writers designed these traps in a way that gives him an arc. The character changes? Incredible! What's not so incredible is the design of this trap. So, the victim in the game is Easton's lawyer, who we see in the beginning of the movie.
I have no doubt about that, but as lead counsel for this company, if you screw up, it comes down on my ass, so... What do you say we prep your deposition?
Ah, Christ.
She has to get through the maze and dodge the steam. There's not really any symbolism in this. It's just like, ooh, ow, steam hurts, doesn't it? I have a similar problem with the setup here as I did with the breathing trap. Lawyer lady. I should probably look up her name. Debbie the lawyer is in the trap because...
You have seen the flaws in your policy, but what you have not seen is the extent some people will go to when faced with death.
Jigsaw. We never see Debbie being a bad lawyer. In fact, in the beginning of the movie, she tells Easton that he needs to be serious about the deposition coming up. She takes her job very seriously, and she's a part of the court case between the Heffley family and Umbrella Health. Essentially, Jigsaw is coming out as the distributor of justice. And I think that you can make a case that maybe the Heffleys would not have been able to get the best justice ever. If the Heffleys couldn't afford to save Frank, they might not be able to afford the best lawyer ever, and at best, they would have settled out of court with Umbrella. Of the many problems that Jigsaw as a character has, he is a terrible distributor of justice. To prove his point, against one guy, he kills 3 people. Also, the eventual point of this trap is dumb. Jigsaw's point is that people will do anything to survive, and when Debbie finds out that the key she needs to escape is inside of Easton, it's time to do a murder. He never seems to consider that people can communicate and work together to survive. But he doesn't let that happen. The screenwriter has decided that Debbie has to die here, because otherwise the other traps wouldn't work. Therefore, she's not allowed to learn anything, and she also didn't need to learn anything in the first place because she never did anything wrong. Behold, the most fun trap in the movie, and perhaps the whole saga. It's total pandemonium, and we love it. Here's my take. Ready? There's 6 of them because it's Saw 6. Yay! Alright, let's actually talk about it. I don't have any structural criticism for this one. Like, yeah, maybe these 6 people don't deserve to be shot by a shotgun, but you feel a lot less empathy for them because they were actually involved in the bad. You see in the beginning of the movie that they are all contractors who find exploits in people's healthcare contracts.
Found 2 application errors for a chronic VO client. This guy practically lives at his doctor's office.
Oh, you got a root canal when you're 7? Fuck you! You're not getting healthcare.
Terminator strikes again.
And there's drama in a Saw movie. You know, these slimy eels have to sliver their way out of this one, and they all have justifications why they should be allowed to sliver on into that good night.
And my parents are safe, okay? They need me, I'm all they have.
You're fucking lying! Your parents hate you, they cut you off!
What? I'm pregnant! I'm pregnant!
No, she's not! She's lying! She's fucking lying!
You get a feeling of desperation from everyone involved, and I don't want to say that it feels real because it's a stupid Saw movie. But I'm not sitting here thinking, wait, this guy's here because he has no friends?
While young Alan will disappear.
Instead, this trap dives deeper into Schadenfreude. These characters don't become better. They don't let their virtues shine. They lie and they cry and they backstab one another for the chance of survival. The lesson he's supposed to learn here is that choosing who to save is hard, actually. It's sawed ad absurdum once again. When you write it down on paper, I actually think the final trap is pretty clever. Rodrick and Susan are explicitly against Easton, because Easton is responsible for the death of Frank. They have a little television in their cell that broadcasts each trap that Easton goes through. They are supposed to view Easton as slowly redeeming himself after each trap, and he chooses family multiple times. So when it's their turn to decide whether Easton should live or die, they are supposed to feel conflicted. Can Rodrick forgive the man who killed his dad, when he's seen him do exactly 3 good things for other people? This is a good, cool, nice concept, and I would really like it if it wasn't in direct conflict with the twist. This movie fucking lies to you to pull off this twist.
I don't even know why we're here.
We're here because of your father.
It uses the Kuleshov effect to say that Easton is related to Rodrick and his mum. This is not what the characters are thinking though. Every Saw has to have a twist, but without this, it could have been much more interesting. Like with most Saw movies, when you're in the middle of the twist, it feels wild. All the pieces are coming into place. Oh my god. But when you stop to think about it for more than 2 seconds, it's frustrating. And I'm not even upset at the fact that Easton got melted, because fuck that guy. It should have been a guillotine. Rodrick rules!
Exploding diaper. All over the place. Exploding diaper. In your face.
Making this the twist feels so forced. And I just love the mindlessness of it all. It makes me so happy. Speaking of which... Hoffman is really contentious among the fan base. When you compare him to Tobin Bell's Jigsaw, he's nothing. We don't say this because we don't like him. The rest of this chapter is actually going to be a kind of defense of him. But in comparison to Jigsaw, he has no character. Let's go back to this Piranha scene.
Made by the fucking insurance companies. Piranha.
We have this horror icon giving a monologue about his socio-political opinions. Even though we've argued that these opinions are pretty skin deep, they still tell us something about his character. It adds depth when you see that he believes in something tangible and complicated. Hoffman doesn't believe in anything. Firstly, the fact that this minor character in the 3rd movie is suddenly thrust into the leading role of the entire franchise is a problem. For the entirety of Saw 1, the police are chasing Jigsaw and they talk up what a genius he is. This builds tension. So when he gets up off of the floor, holy shit, there he is, he tricked you. There is screen presence, and you feel that tension pay off. It makes for a cinematic experience in a movie. Crazy, Hoffman is revealed to be an apprentice. After being a minor character in one previous movie, we don't get to know him, so you're like, that guy? There's no payoff to it. Pulling a twist out of your ass doesn't make for good drama. I do concede that if you view it from a metatextual lens, it's kind of fascinating to see how ill-planned this franchise was. This bumbling buffoon of a character managed to stumble his way into a starring role in the most popular horror franchise of the 2000s. That's hilarious. Secondly, horror slashers are meant to be the very manifestation of agency. They want to do something, generally a murder, and they do something about it. In slasher movies, they're often the inciting incident. They are the danger that other characters must avoid. The plot is driven by their actions, and generally, by the later sequels they become fleshed out characters in their own right. Kramer has a slightly more sophisticated motivation than most horror icons. He wants people to appreciate their lives. Look, it's flawed, it's kinda dumb, but it's colourful, you remember it. Hoffman doesn't want to be here. Hoffman's only here because his sister was murdered, and then bewilderingly, he decided to murder the murderer in a Jigsaw copycat trap. He did this, I guess, to frame Jigsaw instead of just shooting the guy and dumping his body. It would have been so much easier. Then this puts him in the crosshairs of Jigsaw, who doesn't take too kindly to dishonesty. Jigsaw decides, of his own volition, to use Hoffman's apparent skill in making traps and blackmails him to become his apprentice. Hoffman is reluctant, but he goes along with it. In fact, he's so reluctant that in flashbacks, it is revealed that he is scheming to kill Kramer and Amanda during the events of Saw 3 and 4 to get away from their wacky murder cult. That makes sense. But in Saw 6, of his own volition, he takes on Kramer's master plan when he didn't have to.
All you need to know is that from now on, I control all aspects of the game.
So, to sum up, there's no build-up for him. He has no screen presence, and this is a character who doesn't even want to be here. And it's amazing. Never have I ever thought.
Okay, great, that's lovely. A bunch of my audio corrupted and it just decided not to work, so let's pretend that didn't happen. Never have I ever thought that I would enjoy this reluctant slasher character. In Saw 6, his whole deal is just hilarious. This character is so inconsistent, and this makes the otherwise dull police scenes incredibly entertaining to me. The cop segments in each Saw movie have generally been the most boring parts. These scenes are required for the plot to happen. They get across exposition and they try to create tension, but they've never really worked because you don't want to watch a bunch of boring cops talking. You want to see someone lose a pancreas. We keep cutting away from Easton's half of the story for boring cop filler, and in a way, this puts us in the headspace of Hoffman. He doesn't want to see these cops right now. Sure, he didn't want to make these traps in the first place, but he's worked bloody hard for months to get these traps working. He's kind of a sicko, and he just wants to sit back with his popcorn. Like us. But he keeps getting pulled away by the cops, and Hoffman is mopey about it. Like us. Now, while the character of Hoffman is pretty dull, I would be remiss to not mention Costas Mandylor.
There's a little bit of Jigsaw in me, but I'm just trying to get better at it. I'm learning as a character and as a man, but I don't think I'm as clever as my character because I don't think I could build half of these traps.
This guy, and his luscious lips, are having a really good time playing him. There is a dissonance here. He's super into this character, like how Samantha was into him in season 4 of Sex and the City.
He is hot. He is a priest. He is a hot priest. Look at his robe. It's so Robin and his merry men.
Está bien, gracias.
Oh, you tell him friar fuck.
Costas likes his character's reluctance, and he likes the idea of Jigsaw's philosophy.
Agree that it has a message to society, and this question is from Samsung.
Samsung. Very, very smart. As a matter of fact, you should be on the camera right now because that's one of the smartest things. I've tried to say what you're saying to people, but you put it beautifully.
There's this enthusiasm, and yet his character is given nothing to do but be mopey and occasionally talk to people. Much like Tobin Bell, Costas is just happy to be here. But unlike Tobin, his character doesn't have any substance. This gives his performance a real earnest quality. It reminds me a bit of Vin Diesel in the Fast and Furious movies. Costas and Diesel both care deeply about these very silly movies, so I can't be mad about it because I think this makes Hoffman quite charming. And that's a really weird feeling to have about a serial killing mastermind, right? Like, imagine if Hannibal Lecter were just kind of charming. I don't have particularly strong feelings about you, but you do awful things for stupid reasons. I want to have a more intense reaction to you, but the writers didn't give you anything to do. Your arc has been moot up until this point, and I feel like I'm just going to have a panic attack because the most I can say about this character is that he's mildly charming. This is a massive train wreck, and this dissonance really comes to the forefront in Saw 6, because he has succeeded in pulling off his plan to escape the Jigsaw cult, and he has killed the only cop who suspects him, but he just keeps doing it anyway. Why?
It's because the writers had to make another Saw movie, and they needed him to suddenly be into all of this. It's a flaw in the movie, and I feel like I've been talking circles around that flaw, but I have to go back to that idea of disaster piece, because Saw 6 was almost normal, but you made it all the more interesting, and thus it's more fun to discuss, even though it's a terrible movie. It greatly increases the entertainment value of this movie, and that's just wonderful to me. Can you tell I'm having a good time? You expect so little from a late-stage horror sequel, because by this point, they've usually run out of ideas. So when they do something even a little bit smart or interesting, you appreciate it all the more. We're far from the first people to point this out, but towards the end of Saw 6, Hoffman is dragged along by another cop character into a basement.
Here they are, unscrambling Jigsaw's voice to reveal the identity of the new killer. They all seem to suspect Hoffman is actually the killer, but they won't make a move until the voice unscrambler reveals him. And a lot of this is implied. He walks around the room with his back turned to them. They tell him it doesn't make sense that Strom was the killer. The cops circle him like sharks as they list off their evidence. The head detective even flashes his pistol, and Hoffman realizes he's in danger, and he becomes increasingly uncomfortable in this situation. All he can do is pretend that everything is fine. All the while, the voice sampler is repeating the phrase,
"Right now, you're feeling helpless,"
which matches Hoffman's headspace. And there's some honest-to-God tension in this scene. You're sitting there like, oh my god, what's going to happen? The sound design in this scene is actually really good. While the score is eerie and uncomfortable, the samples of the voice are ever present, and they grow progressively louder in the mix. For once in a good way. Eye lines don't entirely match because Hoffman is avoiding their gaze as they walk around the room. This is not at the expense of continuity, however, because it makes us feel like Hoffman is not in control. The head detective brings up one final damning piece of evidence, that being that the hand used to frame Strom was used posthumously. Even if you think about it after the fact and you realize how stupid it is, in that moment, it feels like a real gotcha. They've cracked the case.
And a split second later, the voice unscrambler completes its job and reveals Hoffman as the new Jigsaw killer. There isn't enough time to think about how stupid the hand thing is because for the first time in maybe the entire series, Hoffman is an active agent. It's a wonderful release of tension. There are going to be consequences for this. This scene works because it takes advantage of setup and payoff. We've known throughout the movie that Hoffman has been framing Strom, and the police aren't entirely convinced by it. This scene is spinning several different plates at once, and it's not just done well for a Saw movie, it's done pretty well for a movie. It comes as a surprise because there's been little else like this in the series. The events of this scene are the most dramatic since the end of Saw 3, but this time it's not dumb because the characters have gotten where they are logically and reasonably. It's hard to describe my feelings towards this scene because I can only express it in a kind of condescending manner. Like, it's the same kind of feeling I get when I see a younger sibling do something mildly impressive. Like if they do a good drawing or they beat a video game by themselves. You're like, hey! Good job, buddy! You can only have a feeling like this towards a movie where you have such low expectations. And there are lots of little moments in Saw 6 where I'm mildly impressed.
The acting throughout this series has been generally okay to good. The only really bad acting is in Saw 7.
But since then, I have found someone who has truly become my rock.
But in Saw 6, the acting is one of the highlights. Take the carousel scene. This is not only good filmmaking, but it's very well acted on all fronts. We don't want to repeat ourselves, but hey, good job! The opening trap with the loan sharks is probably the best opening trap in the entire series, and the acting from both performers is really good. You feel their desperation. In particular, this woman, Tiandra Howard, steals the show with her screams and her facial expressions. Fun fact, she did not easily get cast into this movie. She had to prove herself on a trashy reality TV show, where the entire point was to cast the winner in Saw 6. The show was called Scream Queens, and straight away, Tiandra Howard stole the show of her acting chops.
You don't want to do this, this is not you! I know it's not you!
Tanidra was the first person that struck me as a heavy competitor in this.
I think this exemplifies the fun aura surrounding Saw 6. It no longer had the pretension of being a thriller, but now it's just a spooky roller coaster, where nothing much makes sense, but it's incredibly fun. And James Gunn's on it, and he's kind of misogynistic.
It's hotter than a badass Scream Queen.
And I'm like, no, James! A massive problem that plagues all of the Saw movies is their pacing. All of them, aside from 3, are 90 to 100 minutes long, but they always feel way longer than that. Saw 6, in contrast, feels brisk. The police scenes and Jill's subplot really grinds everything to a halt, but that doesn't matter, because this movie keeps everything moving very quickly. There isn't any boring moments, and that's all I want from a movie like this. This is also one of the few movies in the series that makes really good use of its budget. All the Saw movies are pretty cheap to make. They all cost a couple of million at most. And that is one of the reasons why they were so profitable. They were cheap and they got butts in seats. But because they were cheap, they occasionally look like it. Saw 4 and 5 have this problem. The sets don't look great and the lighting is sometimes iffy, but Saw 6 has a lot of great looking sets. The opening trap looks really gritty. The breathing trap looks atmospheric. The hanging trap executes a really simple idea in a good way. The carousel looks phenomenal. The steam trap looks excellent, and you can tell that the set designers had a really great time making them.
Because of all of these factors, 6 is easily forgiven for the regular sins of the franchise. It has the same problems as the rest of them, but I don't care. I just like it.
I just think they're neat.
Kill my father, you motherfucker!
I don't get nostalgic for movies or shows or whatever, but I do have a bit of affection for the Saw movies. It's one of the first horror franchises that I ever completed, and I like most of them. Saw 4 is really, really bad, and Saw 7 is actually one of the biggest piles of trash I've ever seen in my entire life. But to get into that, I would have to create an entire other video. Comment, rate, subscribe for that, please. I'd love to make it. Its strengths have debilitating flaws, but it wants its audience to be invested, even if you understand that the movie isn't great. The thing about most horror franchises is that the first one is actually a movie, and the rest of the sequels are debatable. They want anyone to be able to sit down and enjoy each one by itself. But the Saw franchise has this tangled web of lore that doesn't make sense, even with context. Saw 6 cannot be seen in a vacuum. It knows it's a silly horror movie, and it leans into it, not by turning up the camp and becoming a silly parody of itself, but by making the very vapidness of its own existence part of the selling point. Saw 1 might be an actual movie, a pretty impressive one, but it doesn't hold a candle to the absurdity and the undiluted delight of Saw 6. And that is why it's actually the best one. I wish more movies would take big swings like this. Take large risks instead of just being boring nonsense. I'm a big skeptic when it comes to fan service. I think that just giving the audience what they want, a la Saw 7, is cheap and boring. It is the things that you didn't ask for that leave a larger impression on you. I didn't love Spiral, but I had so much respect for the franchise taking another big swing for the fences, even if it didn't succeed. I think they should just let the franchise die. But I'm always going to be down for whatever crazy nonsense they come up with next. I appreciate your time, and consider subscribing. I have big plans for this channel post-Port Arthur stuff. You know, I would actually love to start analysing more weird Australian movies. We can't forget that Leigh Whannell and James Wan would go on to make more interesting and fascinating things. Peter firmly believes that Malignant is a masterpiece, and it's crazy to think that a weird short they made in university would spawn such incredible talent. You know, it's funny, we actually didn't talk that much about the shorts because there isn't really that much to talk about.
Cut open someone that was still breathing.
I know! That isn't. No.
Do you have any enemies there?
I can't. No. It can't be. I can't escape him!
I'm Paul Motor, the writer and producer of Wasp, the Port Arthur Massacre.
Paul Motor was in the original Saw short?
Wasp is the movie Australia doesn't want made, and it will be the most dangerous film to come out of this country in years.
Is this my life? Why can't I stop him?
Suddenly this fucking giant bird monster comes out of them nowhere. Fucking pick!
It's okay if you don't understand the twist. You have to watch the rest of my videos to get it. Thanks for adjusting the camera. And that makes the twist artificially clever. Anyways, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Love from Peter and Angus. Yay! Oh shit!